by a white vigilante gun owner who we've never been able to even get in front of a grand jury. We know who he is.
Was this the one that there was a controversy about whether he had a gun and they weren't able to ever locate a gun in the skate park? Is this the one?
Yeah,
Yes,
we've been able to
wanted to orient myself to
right.
which one it was. Yeah.
We actually were able to outright prove that Jaquise never had a gun.
Okay.
He did not
because
have
of the
a gun.
picture, right? There was there was a picture.
He was wearing a glove,
Exactly.
and people tried to
that,
say
yeah.
he had a gun. That was why, but which still does not explain how is he shot in the back at 50 yards away, where he fell. So,
Even if it was a gun.
even if he did have a gun,
But he didn't.
he wasn't obviously shooting at anybody when he was shot in the back. So there's all of those components, and so one of the things that we uncovered also is that there's an allegation that the vigilante who shot him in the back is a CI. And so we have this other layer of CIs, just like the ones who came in the federal sting operation, who are out here committing crimes and who are then protected by law enforcement. And then they just move them to other districts to go and manufacture more crime. And so that's why, I really wanted to talk a lot about what Congress can do to get a handle on these things, because these are the issues that have led to a war against the community.
Well, one of the things that I know that I will do as a congresswoman is to shine light on things like that, hold hearings, and ask questions and shine light on it. Because there is the aspect, and I told you at the very beginning, you pass laws, but then the other power you have is the power of the pulpit. And so to raise questions, ask questions, I have never been afraid of standing up and asking questions, and real pointed questions. Why is this happening? What happened? Mm-hmm. Where did it go? Where is the state of the investigation now? Where are the answers? And to hold people accountable. I've always been very good at doing that, and that's what I would do in those cases, because what you're talking about isn't a law, isn't about, you could pass all the laws in the world, but when you have officials taking either unconstitutional or illegal actions, mm-hmm. you need to shine light on that, right. And that's what I would not be afraid to do.
I appreciate that. And just so you're aware, I just got word that the federal government is getting ready to do another similar federal sting to the worst of the worst this year over again to our community. So hopefully we'll be able to get you into office so that you can stop the next rounds from happening. On that same topic, I want to talk a little bit about private prisons. New Mexico is #1 for private prisons out of all of the states. We have many layers to private prisons here in New Mexico.
At the state and the federal level?
At the state and federal level.
Yes.
And it feeds right into undocumented citizens because that's their new economy in New Mexico. We have small counties like San Miguel and Cibola who have built entire economies around their prison industry. What could you do to help get private prisons out of New Mexico, help to halt and remove that element as our economy?
I champion the Justice is Not for Sale Act. This is an act that is languishing in Congress right now, and it should be passed, that takes, that really would stop the use of federal prisons and hiring federal prisons in the federal government. And it is, what you said is actually a travesty, because we have contracts where they have to pay for the prison, for the bed, even if it's not used, which creates incentives for law enforcement to put people in those beds, right. Or for ICE agents to put people in those beds. That is an outrage, and I totally support the Justice is Not for Sale Act, because that act would take the profit incentive out of our federal prisons. I always say follow the money. I find it very disturbing, again, when you look at who donates to members of Congress. Mm-hmm. And as I told you, I won't accept any money from corporate PACs. And this is an example of a corporate PAC that has made a lot of money off of incarceration. And what I think is important is that federal prisons be run by the federal government. and it should not be outsourced. And I believe that that's true with states as well, but I would not have power over that.
Right.
And that's something that has been problematic in the state, as you know, because those guards, again, when you have a profit motive, you have a motive to save money. And the foundation of our criminal justice system is rehabilitation. That should be foundational to what we want to do. It's not retribution. And so what happens is when you don't have the rehabilitation that our communities need, you just end up incarcerating people and devastating communities. We have more people, more citizens in prisons around the country than any other industrialized country in the world.
Right.
That's outrageous. And it also has a political impact because many states then disenfranchise people who've committed a felony. I worked really hard with Tim Canova and other people, other faculty members and other activists to pass the legislation to provide felons in New Mexico the vote. And it was successful, that law was passed. But what I don't see, what happens now is there's no education about how to get your rights back. And it's a very complicated process, and this administration has not made it easy.
Right. That's something that I've been really involved in, and actually the administrative role in DOC says that it is the responsibility of probation and parole to give those certificates and educate citizens on how to go back and re-register to vote, and that piece is completely missing altogether. So there's a lot of administrative
because this administration hasn't done this. And so one of the things, I believe it should be automatic. You pay your debts to society, they should give you a form and say register to vote. You've paid your debts to society.
And I want to see us go. I want to see us go the next step. I want to see us never suppress these votes. There is absolutely no tie to voting rights and crime except for slavery, and so oppressing and suppressing votes. So when you really look at voter suppression, the only basis for this rule is voter suppression. It's about taking voices out of the democracy.
Well, and it's because they have experience with our prison system, and then their voice about how it should operate is silenced. I think it's outrageous. I think it's outrageous.
Absolutely. So that's something that I'm working on at the state level. Is
excellent. I'm glad to know about
trying
that.
to make sure that we restore voting rights to those that are incarcerated and felons, so that their votes are never suppressed. It just doesn't make sense. Crime and punishment compared to civil rights, voting rights doesn't make sense. There's no tie.
There's no reason to punish them further with taking away their voting rights. And again, it's another thing that has a disproportionate impact.
It's highly intentional to suppress those votes. So, with talking about ICE and DACA and private prisons, I wanted to ask you about, Albuquerque is a sanctuary city, but we still had ICE agents a week ago.
Immigrant-friendly city, or did it pass?
We're
immigrant-friendly right now, but I hope we're sanctuary in a few
Whatever
weeks.
it is that they're calling themselves is not enough. Because just a week ago I helped to organize an action because we had ICE agents up and down Central arresting not just employees but also customers out of minority-owned restaurants. And that happened up and down Central all week last week. They're still at the courthouse. I go into the courthouse and the ICE agents are still standing there.
In the Metro Court. Yeah.
And so these are still real problems, even though we are trying as a city to say we're gonna do what we can to protect you here. What could you do with your district to help push issues of protecting the undocumented here?
So this kind of can be a complicated question, but when I organize the sexual assault and domestic violence agencies, it's because VAWA has a provision of ensuring that victims of domestic violence and sexual assault have access to justice. But a very easy piece of legislation that I believe Michelle Lujan Grisham has co-sponsored and several others is a simple piece of legislation that says ICE may never detain anyone in a courthouse or in the surrounding grounds. And it's a clarification of what I think is just true, because the immigration laws have these things called sensitive areas. Schools are sensitive areas. Churches are sensitive areas. And so there's a whole process that they have to go to before they're going to detain someone. And I think that the same thing should be true for the courthouses. And that is something that we can do at the federal level. I think that state courts should also do it as an access to justice issue. Because I don't think that our constitutional laws and victims are protected by our Constitution. And so to not allow them access to the courthouse is depriving them of access to justice. And that's foundational to our Constitution, is the idea of access to justice. And so while I can do it at the federal level, it also has to happen at the state level and the state court level.
I like that. Is there a way to extend that to public spaces? Like
Well, one of the
libraries, community centers because it's
Hospitals,
not,
yeah.
hospitals, there should be safe public places. I mean, these are taxpayers also. Their tax dollars help to build the community centers and the libraries. So, it seems they should be protected while using those services.
One of the things that I researched when I was working on this project was I saw so many Obama memos, Obama administration memos about protecting these spaces. And one of the first things that this administration did was to rescind every single one of these memos. And they caused great confusion, because some of these memos are required by the Violence Against Women Act. Some of these memos are required by other legislation. And so to rescind all of them created a huge mess for ICE. They didn't know which memos to keep in effect, not to keep in effect. And this administration still hasn't clarified it, which memos are required by federal law and which are not. Because the Obama administration really, I thought, went a long way toward giving ICE guidance to how they should behave to keep our communities safe and to keep our communities vibrant and to make sure that there was no racial profiling in our communities. What I see is when you have issues like that are protected by memorandums in administrative processes, the only way to make sure that they can continue is to make them actual federal law.
Right.
And so that's a project that
Do you
I would
see
be
yourself
interested.
championing something like
Yes, I
that?
do. I absolutely do.
That's wonderful.
As you know, I worked at Enlace Comunitario, and as you know, I have a lot of experience working with immigrants and a lot of allies in the immigrant community. And I'm also on the board of directors of MALDEF, who has been a big champion of immigrant rights, and it's something I would expect to do too.
Thank you. That was, as in winding down, part of what I wanted to ask you is, what are your community ties? And I think that it's important because people know you as a college professor. They know you as an academic. They know you as an attorney. But a lot of people don't know that you have those connections to the community. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about the work you've done at the community level.
Well, 4 years ago, I left the law school to head Enlace Comunitario. And through Enlace Comunitario, I was able, for example, to have this project where we went to the Supreme Court and have something signed by sexual assault and domestic violence agencies throughout the state, because I developed those relationships. I also developed alliances with the immigrant rights groups. So sexual assault, domestic violence agencies, immigrant rights groups are very important. We created also La Red, which is a group of South Valley, and you know about La Red, South Valley nonprofits serving the community, and I was part of that community and developed a lot of community ties through that as well. At the law school, our community lawyering clinic partnered with organizations like the Healthcare for the Homeless, with organizations, because our idea was we needed to go outside the law school and not be in an ivory tower, but develop the relationships with the community. And that was my goal, was to create these community, respond to the needs of the community and create these community ties with our clinics so that our services were valuable to the community. And I've served as the,
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I've served as, I was the president of the Southwest Women's Law Center. And I was on the board of Enlace Comunitario, of course, for quite a while. And I've served on the mall board. I was the president also of the New Mexico Hispanic, the Hispanic Lawyers, the New Mexico Hispanic Lawyers Association. And I did that when we were founding it. I did that in the 90s. It's kind of, I served on the Air Quality Control Board in the 90s. So of all of the candidates, I would say my ties with this community are the deepest. And I've worked for social justice for decades, since the 90s. I was going up to testify, going up with Lynn Pearls to testify. I know this sounds quaint now, but on domestic partnerships in the 90s and the early 2000s.
It was important work.
Well,
it laid the foundation.
It led the foundation.
Right.
It led the foundation. People, when we didn't get, because we weren't ever successful at getting domestic partnerships, and maybe that's good, because maybe we would have been stuck with domestic partnerships, which aren't the same. So maybe it's really good, but people started realizing what an important issue it was. So I've been working on these issues before they were popular. Some people are kind of new to progressive ideas. I've been working on them for a long time.
Thank you. So I'm a Black Latina, and I'm deeply tied to the Black community, and we're small here. In the Albuquerque area, 3.3%. So what are your ties? Our community is growing rapidly. We had a big transplant of Katrina people who came to live in Albuquerque and reside here. Do you see yourself as, can you tell me about those ties and your connections to the African American community here?
Yes, I'm a member of the African American Caucus, Democratic Caucus. I'm a member of that. And I was a member because I was invited by the chair, who's the director of the Southwest Women's Law Clinic. And so through her, I have definitely had a lot of ties. I actually was, I think I'm the only candidate still who advertised in some of the Black churches here. And I think that we need to tell the story of African Americans in this community, because it's a long history.
It's a very long history.
It's a very long history, and we need to tell those stories. Alfred Mathewson, as you know, is the dean of the law school, African American, and he and I were allies at the law school for many years, and through him, I really made a lot of connections with African Americans. One of the other reasons I joined that caucus. It's people of color need to understand that all of these issues are intersectional.
Exactly.
And that if we don't stand together, we don't have a chance at changing the communities. And so I think it's really important that all of us, Black, Latinos, Native, Asian, all of the LGBTQI communities realize that oppression to any one of us is oppression to all of us. And I've always believed that, and I will continue to work hard for all the communities of color here in the district, but anywhere. I love that Martin Luther quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And I believe that.
I appreciate that. I think that's a great place to stop.
Okay.
And I want to thank you for that.
Thank
I
you.
do appreciate that.
Thank you for doing this, and thank you for all the work you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.